Good morning and welcome to The Innovators. Each week, we're serving up real talk with badass women who are dishing it out and dishing out only the truth. No BS here and no fluff, just raw, honest stories and lessons to inspire and empower the next generation of trailblazing women. We're here to keep it real and pay it forward. I'm your humble host, Cynthia Nelson, three-time entrepreneur, investor, and advisor. It's a great pleasure for me today because I am like fan number one to have Alison Bryant, CEO of the Learning Academy Foundation, on the podcast. Alison, welcome.
Thank you. And the fandom is mutual.
It's like Mutual Admiration Society.
Exactly.
You have a crazy, amazing background. Like I want people to know like where you came from. Like how did you start getting into the kids learning space and really kind of the media space? What's your background?
I actually spent the first probably 20 something years of my life trying not to go into kids media because I had a father who had been in that space more on the academic side, but
Hmm.
had been an early Spencer Fellow at Sesame Workshop when it was still getting built. And, as the child who was probably closest to him, certainly in personality, tried to get as far away as possible. That failed. But I ended up in undergrad. I went to Davidson College, and as political science, I thought I was going to be an international diplomat, and took the LSATs and all this, and ended up doing consulting for a year, and did was not a fan. And so not because of the consulting side, I just ended up on one of those projects where I was like, recoding a
Yeah.
terminal, kind of thing. So I ended up going back to grad school pretty quickly and realized that media was really the space that I wanted to be in. And in part because the field of communication really let you do a lot of different things. It in and of itself is this amalgamation of a lot of different disciplines and psychology
Right.
and sociology and whatever.
Right.
And so it sort of hit home for me. But I'd say career wise, it's been very opportunistic.
Mhm.
And I think that's been a big learning for me. That was my gut instinct. As new opportunities came, I sort of took them, right? So when I left grad school, I went and was a professor and loved it. Loved engaging with the students, but something was missing, right? And
Mhm.
it didn't feel like it was making enough of an impact in real time, sort of in that
Mhm.
moment. And so I had the opportunity to go to Nickelodeon, build out their digital research team. And I was like, well, that's great. And loved it. Again,
Yeah.
really fast paced, it was a great introduction to the industry. It was certainly, and I had a great mentor who will come back around in my story, who was sort of my main client. And, he would stop by my office and he'd say, okay, you've been traveling for 3 weeks and you've been to all of our different studios. What are the top three things you've learned? And
Mhm.
for an academic, that's really hard,
Mhm.
right, to distill. But he really taught me how to distill. And then I went from that and I was like, oh, but it's not quite my heart. It's a little too commercial. So I
Mhm.
created my own company, PlayScience, which was double bottom line. And that was the moment when I realized that double bottom line and social enterprise was really core to my being. And so I was helping organizations to create better products for kids and families, but I also recognized that they need to be commercially viable,
Right.
or at least sustainable in some way. And so it was
Right.
sort of towing that line between social enterprise or commercial and for profit nonprofit. And then when I left there, that was a really hard decision to leave
Yeah.
the work that I was doing. And I knew that if I ever did, I didn't really necessarily want to go totally for profit. I didn't really want to go nonprofit. Everything has there, as my
Yeah.
former mother-in-law would say, Michigana. But I knew that I needed to go someplace that fit that core value of mine,
Right.
of that sort
Right.
of double line. And this opportunity came up at AARP, which is a social enterprise. It's one of the oldest
Right.
social enterprises
Yeah.
in the world. It's 65 years old, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. It was also the other end of the age spectrum. I was a little burnt
Right.
out on kids. I was like, but it was a special population too, right? Whether it was because of the way you did research or just thinking about technology and user
Mhm.
experience. And so I had this incredible time at AARP where I ran the research center, but then I also took on all of their impact work around technology and digital equity right as the pandemic was happening, right in that
Interesting.
moment where
Yeah. Very
if you were an
key.
older adult and you didn't have access to technology, you couldn't get to
Yeah.
your doctor, you couldn't get your social
Right.
security
Nothing.
benefits, like
Yeah.
right. So that was great because I had been more than just research for a really long time, even though that was the core of where I started in my career.
Hmm.
Um, but that really let me have my hands in all the pots, right? The policy and the advocacy and acquisitions and all that kind of thing. I'd done bits and pieces of that, but being in charge of that, really leading that,
Right.
I was able to do that there. And then I had this incredible opportunity. That person who had mentored me at Nickelodeon became the CEO at Sesame,
Ah,
and he and I spent probably about 6 months just having a conversation around
yeah.
what's a big idea? What could the future of Sesame look like? And so when I left AARP, it was going to go to Sesame. Um, I had worked with that brand for so many years. I knew so
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
it's such a passion of mine. But I really went in and took all the different pieces, also another social enterprise, one of the oldest
Yeah.
that's been
Yeah.
out there, right? Both commercially and nonprofit grant funded. But really went in to think about what is the future of social enterprise in kids media, and how can
Hmm.
you take a legacy brand and bring that
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
to sort of this space that we have. So I spent about 3 years there, and then had this really incredible opportunity to I was doing a lot of work and I got matched, really, I would say. They weren't thinking about it this way, but through some work we were doing with the Gates Foundation.
Hmm.
And I was really thinking at Sesame about new revenue opportunities, new ways of engaging kids. Like, what is the white space that we see in early
Hmm.
childhood? And the big thing that kept coming up was, you know, children, they don't live lives that, are segmented. They experience the world as it is, right?
Right.
And that includes media, that of
Yeah.
course now is so pervasive. But there was no way, whether it was Sesame or otherwise, to engage that child in a really cohesive learning experience, right?
Hmm.
And to take what they're learning from Sesame and map it to what they're learning in their preschool. And then the preschool data doesn't actually match or go into the kindergarten data, right? Like
Right.
those are
Right.
totally disjointed. And so there was no way to actually capture early childhood. So we were doing this work with the Gates Foundation at Sesame and got introduced to learning economy, which they were really doing this across the whole lifespan. So there was a total alignment of values, and really in a very sophisticated way. And so when I decided that my time at Sesame, like it wasn't the fit that I thought it was going to be for where I wanted to go, and the innovation that I was interested in seeing,
Yeah.
learning economy. We were having dinner, and it just sort of was like, why are we not doing this together? This seems perfect. They were in a moment to scale up, and I could come in and really help them. So that's really interesting, right? So I started as an academic. I then went to media for profit,
Right.
then was an entrepreneur, then went to nonprofit social enterprise. I've been doing that. And learning economy is interesting. It's actually started as a for profit, it transitioned to a nonprofit for
Nonprofit.
funding. And
Yeah.
now we're in the process of finding our way into the social enterprise space more volitionally from a
Hmm.
from a model standpoint.
That's an incredible background. I mean, you've gone for profit, nonprofit, education, media, tech, kids, aging adults, you know. I would say like in these last like 10 to 15 years, you've got now this, well, definitely now this group of, I mean, they speak digital, frankly. I mean, that's it. Like they speak digital, they're digital natives from the beginning. Like
Yeah.
what's changing? And I think second part of it is how is AI impacting, supporting kids programming, good and bad? Like there's
Yeah.
two sides of this one, right? With AI, there's a lot of good things I think they're going to happen, but eh, there's no, it doesn't feel like there's any freaking guardrails on it sometimes.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because if I could take like a little moment into maybe 20, 25 years ago, when I was
Yeah,
actually finishing my PhD, my dissertation, I was studying how the kids' media entry had evolved, right?
yeah,
From a network analysis perspective. And the big aha was that, and this was based in the sort of network data for looking at the community itself,
right.
was that we were at an inflection point, right, of
Yeah,
transformation. And this was as we were moving into digital, right, moving into more on the interactive gaming and websites. And this was
right,
right before
right.
we started getting iPhones and apps and all that, which of
Yeah,
course very much disrupted it. And the structures that had really supported television based and even radio based mass media were
Hmm.
sort of crumbling, right?
Hmm.
Those nonprofit
Yeah.
advocacy groups
Yeah.
couldn't figure out funding because no one
Right.
knew what to fund.
Right.
Everyone was like up in the air.
Yeah.
The big companies, when I went to Nick, they're like, we're investing in digital. So I went, and then they're like, we're not really going to invest in
Not
it,
really.
right?
Not really. Yeah.
Like, we're not, so everybody was a little bit up in arms. And I think that's what we saw for about a decade, right? As people sort of like trying to figure it out, and the boom and the bust and the internet and a lot of disruption. Then you ended up once, certainly for kids, once you had tablets and
Right.
smartphones and
Right.
even
Right.
things like the Nintendo
Yeah. Yeah. The
Wii,
gaming set. Yeah.
right? Or
Exactly.
Connect,
Yeah.
which sort of opened the aperture for user experience
Right.
to a broader audience. Then you had this real like, oh wait, kids, we should really be engaging them, kids and families. At the same time, you had a proliferation of content for young kids
Yeah.
along a spectrum of education, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
amazing, producers like Angela Santamero, who created Blue's Clues, but really was able to then create Daniel Tiger and
Right.
well, a ton
Right.
of other things, right? So there was a space that really worked. And then you had, I'd say, YouTube was popular, but it wasn't the kind of creator culture that
Right.
we got, right? That
Right.
created the Coco Melons and the Blippies
Yeah.
and whatever. And that was something a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
kids had more agency in what
Hmm.
they chose, but the algorithm also had more power,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, and I think parents felt disempowered in a
Hmm.
lot of ways, right? And so that coupled with AI, I think has really put us in an interesting moment where we're beyond, I mean, there's still a very strong creator culture, and there is some incredible, by the way,
Yeah.
content
Yeah.
that is out there, because you don't have to have a big high production,
Yeah.
shop to do great
Right.
work,
Yeah.
if it's thoughtful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But there is a lot of schlock
Yeah.
out there that's
Yeah.
being built, and even things like Cocomelon, and I'm not saying Cocomelon, I'm not going to get into good or bad, but it was built for attention, right?
Yeah.
It was built to
Yeah.
get kids eyeballs. It
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
built right for deep quality. And that is on with AI, that is on, I would say, like hyperspeed,
Yeah.
right? Because if you look at the way that AI is empowering development,
Yeah.
um, the idea, and there's also this assumption that kids media is easy, I think, for a lot of
Yeah. A lot of
people,
people, I don't understand why they think that, but they definitely do.
right? And so like, oh well, it's like
Oh,
slap
just
something on it, right?
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Like, and it'll be engaging. So I think that's the the fear, that's the sort of negative that can come. On the
Hmm.
positive side, if I think about a brand like Sesame, this technology also allows us to do some incredible things with characters like Muppets that children
Right.
adore and
Yeah.
love,
Yeah.
to make it more personalized. I'd say where there's opportunity is in, I'd say, even going beyond personalization of
Hmm.
content to
Hmm.
really providing opportunities for deep learning. And that's what we're doing at Learning Economy. But that really has to be thoughtful. And I think
Yeah.
that, one of the things, I mentioned social enterprise is like a through line for my career and my values. Another one is equity design.
Yeah.
And this idea that, when we're designing, whether it's new technology or anything really, we need to be designing at the edges, right? We need to be designing, because if you design at the edges of that normal distribution curve, it always works for the center,
Everybody,
right?
yeah,
I mean,
everybody
it's
wins.
universal design, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Everyone wins. And so that AARP, so that,
Yeah.
and all of my working kids, that is not
Yeah.
where we are right now with the
Hmm.
vast majority of, I'd say, content creation and AI and even the market. And so my concern is that, and, so that's the ARP, that, things go and get built, and AI is based in data.
Yeah.
And if you're not included in the data, you're not included in the way that it's being designed. So
Exactly.
that to me is the big moment,
Yeah.
right? Is making sure that as we're designing, it's equitable. And I actually don't believe that equity can be driven certainly solely through, but I don't think policy is
Hmm.
the first way in. I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
a recognition that you actually improve product and improve market
Hmm.
is the way to convince, and you do, right? We have
Yes.
so many examples of
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
but people still see
Overwhelming
it as like
examples.
it's
Yeah.
right. But
It's
people still
like,
see this as like this tension. I don't understand.
I mean, DEI has gotten such a bad rap in the last, 4 months.
Yeah,
And it's incredible for me coming out of media and not so much in the kids, but the parenting side. And like, okay, yeah, but the Hispanic consumer, you can't like they're overspending on all
yeah,
these categories. And if you're not playing to them in some way, then you're not
exactly.
playing to massive audiences in massive cities where you're just wasting your media spend otherwise. So I don't, yeah, and the inclusion for kids of all types of kids, right? Again, I love your programming to the edges because then everybody wins. The middle is always happy with
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I was having this. I had a great conversation yesterday. I catch up with the former head of equity, innovation, and a range of things at IBM, who's there for
Yeah,
many, many years. And we were catching up. And she said that we were talking about this sort of what's been happening in the world around
right,
DEI. And
right.
she said, it's so frustrating as someone who was on the vanguard of that, right, in
Yeah,
technology, I mean, for
yeah,
many years, and it's one of the
right.
largest companies. She said, because I never saw it
Yeah,
as being
yeah,
really core about just like, diversity or policy. She said, I always saw it as driving innovation,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that when you have that lens, it
yeah,
really flips the value
yeah,
that you place on it, and even the way you go about it, right, where it's not a rubber stamp,
right.
it's an infusion into everything that you do.
Yeah. I agree with you completely. And like the work that you're doing, I think at Learning Economies is really going to be game changing for so many people and so many companies. Um, What's the best piece or most important piece of advice you've ever been given?
Hmm. I think there's two things. I think one is always take the opportunity.
Mhm.
Certainly that my career is an example of that.
Mhm.
Is fear is real, right?
Mhm.
But being okay just saying, yep, I'm going to go try it. I know I don't know everything. I know I'm not
Right.
perfect. And looking at it as a learning experience, I
Yeah.
think is one. So I think just that sort of take the opportunity, say yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I also am now working on saying no. We were just laughing about that before we recorded, but say yes. Really,
Yeah.
really don't be afraid of taking those opportunities. And that what that does to me is that opens up doors for. I mean, my career has literally been creating my roles. Every place I've
Right.
gone, I've sort of created what I've done. And I think we're going to see more and more of that with the next
Hmm.
generation, right? Is this,
Hmm.
first of all, they have an expectation that
Yes,
it's not going to be
definitely.
a stagnant role. But I think that the reality is that the space is moving so quickly
So
that
fast.
you can get an education in something that's not going to make any difference, right? You
Right.
need to learn how
Right.
to learn. So I think that's one piece. I think the other, and I will say you're a perfect example of this, in my life, is always assume that people are going to come back around in your life and that they're there for a reason in that moment,
Yeah.
positive or negative.
Yeah.
Your network, whether it's strong ties or loose ties, it's your network, and you
Yeah.
have to foster it. And there are times when people are going to go out and live your life, but welcome people back, assuming
Yeah.
they're not toxic, with
Yeah.
open arms, and just know that they're there for the right reason and the right moment. And I think both of those are probably hallmarks of how my career has evolved in the
Yeah.
way that it has. Like that person I was just mentioning from IBM, when we met when I was at AARP, I haven't talked to her in 3 or 4 years. She saw I
Right.
was learning, kind of, it's like, oh wait, now
Oh,
there's this new opportunity, and it was the right time for both of
boom.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. And any advice you would give your 25-year-old self?
Don't take everything personally.
That's a good one.
Right.
It's not all about
I
you.
think it's definitely not about you,
Yeah.
even though it feels like it, because we all feel that way. And recognize that you are you're and this is a truism, but you are in control of the way that you react to things. Um, and you know, I think that I would say that for every part of life, by the way. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
certainly not just business, but I
Yeah.
think that it's so hard, especially early on in your career. I mean, it can be
So
more frustrating later, but when you feel like a cog in the wheel, when
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
whatever, it's yes, of course, it's personally you, but people are trying their best, right?
yeah,
Give people grace.
yeah.
There's a lot of hard stuff that people are dealing with. On the flip side, know when to just be like, no, stand
Yeah.
up for yourself and walk away.
Right, right. The boundaries for sure.
Yeah,
It's a learned behavior, right?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I love this. How do people get a hold of you if they want to talk to you or work with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. You can always find me on LinkedIn. And so people can reach out there. For certainly learning economy,
Yep,
it's learningeconomy.io. If people are
great.
interested in finding out more about the incredible work that we're doing there and creating a lifelong learning passport, to really empower people to own their own data and to sort of build this lifetime of learning in a world that is really complex and is always changing. So yeah, happy. I'm Alison at learningeconomy.io if people want to reach out to me there.
Awesome. Allison, it's been really great seeing you, giving virtual hugs over the thing. I'm glad you're in bright clothing like me.
Always.
Sister from another mister that we are. Thank you
Exactly.
so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Cynthia. It's always, always, always a pleasure to chat.
Thanks.